I had not slept a whole night in 9 years, and the reason was a sound. It came on the nights when the mist lay thick over the water meadows, when Fenmore drowned itself in white, and the great hall on the ridge seemed to float loose from the world below. It came thin and far, threading up through the fog the way smoke finds a crack in a shut door, a voice, a woman's voice, singing low to the dark. I could never say from where. Sound moves strangely over the meadows. It bends around the crofts and pools in the hollows, so that a thing sung a mile off can seem to breathe against your very window. I would rise from my bed and stand at the sill and hold my breath to catch it, and my wolf, who had been silent in me for longer than I cared to count, would lift its head somewhere behind my ribs and go still as a hound that has caught a scent on the wind. Then the mist would thin, and the voice would be gone, and I would be left standing in the cold with my heart going like a fist against a door, and no idea in the world what I had been listening for. My people thought me strange for it, a king who wandered his own ramparts at night, who asked the watch if they had heard anything, who rode out alone into the fog and came back saying nothing. They forgave me it the way you forgive a grief. My mother had been a great Luna, and she had died young, and it was assumed, I think, that the sound I chased was some memory of her, some old ache dressed up as a song. Let them think it. I could not have told them the truth because I did not know it. I only knew that somewhere in my valley a woman sang when she thought no one could hear, and that some part of me I could not name had spent 9 years leaning toward her voice like a plant toward a window. I want to be honest about the kind of man I was in those years, because it matters to what came after. I was not a cruel king, but I was a closed one. My father had ruled Fenmore with an open hand, and it had cost him a brother's betrayal, cost him land, cost him, in the end, the strength to fight the fever that took him. I took the lesson badly. I decided a king's warmth was a door left open, and I shut mine. I did not take a mate. My council paraded daughters of the neighboring holds before me year on year, and I looked at each of them the way you look at a well-made chair, with respect and without any wish at all to sit in it. My wolf never stirred for one of them. I began to believe it never would. I began to believe the silence in me was simply what I was. I was wrong about that, as I was wrong about almost everything that mattered, until the autumn the mist came early and the voice came with it, closer than it had ever come. It was a night in the 9th year, near the turn of the season, when the fog rolled down off the high moor and filled the whole valley to the brim. I could not sleep. I never could on such nights. I dressed in the dark and went down through the sleeping hall and out past the watch, who knew better by now than to stop me, and I took my horse and rode down off the ridge into the white. The song was there, fainter than my own footfalls at first, then clearer as I dropped into the meadows, as though the mist were carrying it up to meet me. I had chased it 100 times and lost it 100 times. But that night the wind lay dead still, and the sound did not scatter, and for the first time in 9 years I could follow it as a true thing, turn by turn, hollow by hollow, down toward the low crofts along the water where the poorest of my people lived. I will not pretend I was calm. My hands shook on the reins. My wolf was awake in me and straining, and I let it lead because I had nothing else to steer by. Down past the byres, down along the Mill-Leat, down to where a row of low stone crofts hunched their backs against the damp, dark every one, shutters closed against the night. All but one small window, unshuttered, its glass gone gold with a single rushlight within. And through it, plain now, no longer a thread through fog, but a voice in a room a stone's throw off. A woman was singing. I got down from my horse. I do not remember deciding to. I remember only that I was on my feet in the wet grass, moving toward that gold square of light the way a cold man moves toward a fire, and that with every step the song went further into me, until I stood at last a few paces from the sill, in the dark where she could not see me, and I listened to the sound I had spent 9 years of my life failing to name. She was young. I could see her now, bent over a basin of gray water, her sleeves pushed up, scrubbing at something in the way of a servant who has been given the night's worst work to do alone. A plain girl by the standards the court would use. A worn dress, a smudge of ash on her cheek, hair coming loose from its pins and hanging in her eyes. She scrubbed and she sang, and she had no idea in the world that she was doing anything remarkable at all. That was the thing that undid me. She sang the way other people breathe, without thought, without vanity, as though it cost her nothing, as though it were simply the sound a heart makes when it is left alone long enough to make it. And my wolf, which had not spoken in me in 9 years, which I had privately buried and mourned as a dead thing, my wolf answered. I felt it rise in my chest like water rising in a well. Not a growl, not a howl, something lower and older than either. A note struck somewhere beneath the breastbone. A resonance, as if her voice had reached into me and found a string I did not know I carried and set it humming. I had to put my hand against the cold stone of the wall to stay standing. 9 years. 9 years I had chased this, and here it was, and it was not a memory of my mother, and it was not a grief. It was a woman with ash on her cheek scrubbing a pot in the dark, and everything in me that had ever been alive was straining toward her like a tide. She stopped singing. She lifted her head not toward me. I had made no sound, but as if some sense finer than hearing had told her the night had changed. She looked at the window, at her own reflection in the black glass, and for a moment her face held an expression I have never forgotten. Not fear, but a kind of practiced flinch, the look of someone who has been caught doing a thing she has been taught to be ashamed of. "Foolish," she whispered to the glass. "Foolish girl, as if anyone's out there to hear." And she bent back to the water, and she did not sing again, and I stood in the dark a long time after her light went out, learning how to breathe in a world that had, in the space of one song, become entirely different from the one I had ridden down into. I did not go to the door. I want that understood. It would have been the easiest thing. I was the king. The croft was mine. The girl in it was mine to summon if I wished. A lesser part of me wanted to pound on that door and demand to know her name and drag the whole household from their beds to answer for why my fated mate was scrubbing pots alone at midnight in the meanest croft in Fenmore. But I had heard the way she said it, as if anyone's out there to hear. And I understood, standing there, that whatever this girl was to me, she was to herself a person who had been taught that her voice was a shameful thing, a thing to be done only in the dark, only alone, only where it could trouble no one. If I came to her as a king out of the night and told her that her singing had pulled the ruler of the valley from his bed for 9 years, she would not hear it as love. She would hear it as one more thing she had done wrong. One more way she had been caught. So I went home. And I came back the next night and the night after, and I stood in the dark below her window and I listened. And I began, patiently, carefully, the way you gentle a wild thing that has learned to fear the hand, to learn who she was. Her name was Elowen. I learned it from the household, whom I set my people to asking quietly on some invented errand about the Croft rents. She had come to Fenmore as a small child, an orphan of the fever years, taken in by the family that held the low crofts, taken in and put to work, and never once let up from it. They called her wolfless. She had never shifted, never shown the beast, and among wolves that is a kind of unpersoning. A wolfless girl is barely a girl at all in the eyes of the cruel, and the family that kept her had been cruel in the small, grinding way that leaves no marks. They did not beat her. They simply arranged her life so that she would understand, every hour of it, that she was worth less than the others, that she ate on their sufferance, that the roof over her was a charity she could never repay. And they had forbidden her to sing. I learned this last from an old woman of the Crofts who had known Elowen since she was small. The family could not bear it, she told me, the girl's voice. Not because it was bad, because it was beautiful, and beauty in a wolfless charity child was an affront, a thing that drew the eye and the ear where they had no business going. So they had shamed her out of it, called it showing off, called it putting on airs. Punished her when she was small for singing in the yard, until she learned to keep her voice locked up inside her, to let it out only at night, only alone, only where the dark would not carry it back to anyone who might make her sorry. As if anyone's out there to hear. I sat with that a long while. I had spent 9 years believing I was haunted. And all that time, a mile down the valley, a girl had been singing to the one audience she believed was safe, the empty dark. And the dark had carried her voice up the hollows to the one man in the world it was made for, and neither of us had known. I did a foolish thing then, and I am not sorry for it. I did not summon her, I did not send for her to the hall. Instead, some nights later, I went down alone into the crofts in the gray light before dawn, dressed as no king. An old cloak, no crown, no guard, and I walked the water path as if I were any traveler. And I contrived to be at the mill-leet drawing water at the hour I knew she would be sent for it. She came down the path with 2 heavy pails and a yoke across her thin shoulders, her eyes on her feet, moving with the particular quiet of a person who has learned that being noticed is the beginning of trouble. She did not see me until she was nearly upon me. When she did, she stopped, and her whole body went to that flinch I had seen through the window, braced, apologetic, ready to be in the wrong. "Forgive me, sir," she said at once low. "I didn't see you." I'll not be in your way." "You're not," I said. "There's water enough in this leat for the two of us, I think." She glanced up at me then, just once quick, and I saw her eyes properly for the first time, gray, like the mist, and older than her years, and careful. She did not know me. Why would she? The wolfless scullery maid of the Low Crofts had never in her life been in a room with her king. She saw only a broad man in a worn cloak, filling a bucket at a leat, and she did the sum a lifetime had taught her. A strange man, a lonely path. A girl worth nothing that anyone would answer for, and she edged toward the water with her eyes down and her shoulders up, meaning to fill her pails and be gone. "I heard singing," I said, "the other night down along the Crofts. In the mist." She went perfectly still. "A woman's voice," I said, keeping mine easy, filling my own bucket, not looking at her, giving her the dark to hide and even in the daylight. "Loveliest thing I ever heard, carried all up the valley. Whoever she was, she had a gift in her that most people go their whole lives without hearing the like of." For a long moment she said nothing. When I did glance at her, she was staring at the water, and her face had gone through something, a flash of something bright and terrible, hope and fear so tangled I could not have said where one ended. And then she shut it down the way she'd shut the window, and she said, in a voice scrubbed flat of everything, "You must be mistaken, sir. There's no one down here sings. The family wouldn't allow it. It's not a thing they hold with." "No," I said. "No," she said. "It'd have been the wind, most like. It does strange things over the meadows, makes you hear what isn't there." And she hoisted her pails, and she went back up the path with the yoke biting her shoulders, and she left me standing at the leat with the gray water running through my hands, understanding for the first time in my life exactly how thoroughly a person can be taught to deny the best thing in themselves. She had heard me call her voice the loveliest thing in the valley, and she had answered that it must have been the wind. I could have raged, some kings would have. I could have ridden to the Low Crofts that same hour and hauled the family that kept her out into the yard and made an accounting for every year they had ground her small. My wolf wanted it badly, wanted to stand between her and everyone who had ever made her flinch, and there is a part of me even now that wishes I had. But I had learned something at the leat, watching her call her own gift the wind. If I came down on that household like a storm in her name, she would not feel avenged. She would feel exposed. She would feel that her secret shame, the singing, the thing she'd been punished for, had been dragged into the light and made the cause of a great trouble, and she would blame herself for the trouble, because she had been taught that every trouble in her vicinity was hers to carry. I would win her a victory she would experience as a punishment. So I did the hardest thing. I went slow. I came again to the leat, and again in my worn cloak the strange, kind traveler who seemed always to be passing through. I did not speak of the singing again, not for a long while. I spoke of ordinary things, the weather, the water, the state of the path. I let her grow used to me, let her learn, one gray dawn at a time, that here at least was one person in Fenmore in whose presence she did not have to brace. A man who filled his bucket beside her and asked her nothing and wanted nothing and did not, ever, make her feel she was in the wrong for existing where he could see her. It took weeks, but slowly the flinch went out of her. Slowly she began to speak first, a word about the frost, a small dry joke about the weight of the pails, a question about where I was bound that I turned aside gently and she did not press. I learned the shape of her mind in those gray mornings, and it was a good shape, quick and kind and wry underneath the fear, with a way of noticing small beautiful things. The light on the water, the first hard berries in the hedge, that told me the singing was not the only lovely thing she'd been taught to keep locked up. And one morning, without my having led her to it at all, she said, "You were right about the singing." I said nothing. I let the water run. "It was me," she said, so quietly I felt it more than heard it. "I sing sometimes, at night, when the work's done and the house is asleep." She stared hard at the leat. "I know I oughtn't, it's a foolishness, but it's the one thing that's—" She stopped. "It's the 1 hour of the day that's mine, that's all. I don't sing for anyone. I'd die before I sang for anyone. I only—" and here her voice dropped so low it was almost gone. "I only wanted you to know I wasn't lying to you. That first day, when I said it was the wind, I was lying, and I've thought about it every day since that I lied to you when you'd said such a kind thing. So, it was me. It was always me. I have been a king a long time. I have had oaths of fealty sworn to me by hard men on their knees, have been given the loyalty of warriors and the counsel of elders, and once, the surrender of an enemy who laid his sword at my feet. Nothing anyone has ever given me has cost them what that cost her. That small confession at the leet. It was me, handed to a stranger in a worn cloak by a girl who had been taught her whole life that her voice was a thing to be ashamed of. "Elowen," I said. It was the first time I had used her name. She looked up, startled that I knew it. "Thank you for telling me, and I'll tell you something true in return, and I'd have you believe it because I don't say it lightly." I looked at her, and I let her see that I meant it with everything I had. "It's the finest sound in this whole valley. There's not a thing sung in the high hall to rival it, and the only foolishness anywhere near it is that you've been made to believe otherwise." She did not answer. Her eyes filled, and she looked away, out over the water meadows, so that I would not see. But she did not tell me it was the wind. And when she went back up the path that morning, she did not go with her shoulders up. I could not court her as a stranger at a leet forever. She was my fated mate. I had known it from the first note, and every gray morning since had only driven it deeper. And a fated mate is not a thing a man can visit at dawn and pretend away by daylight. My wolf would not have borne it much longer. Already I was sleeping through the nights for the first time in 9 years, because the thing I had been straining toward was found, and every part of me that had been leaning toward her voice across the dark was now simply, quietly, waiting to be beside her. But I dreaded the telling, because the telling meant she would learn who I was, that the kind stranger at the leet was the king of the valley, the lord of the very family that had ground her small, and I feared what that would do. I feared she would feel deceived. I feared she would feel that the one safe person in her life had been, all along, the most powerful and least safe person she could imagine, and that everything easy between us would curdle into the old flinch. I chose the night to tell her, and I chose the way, and I got both, I think, half wrong and half right, in the manner of a man doing the most important thing of his life with no idea how to do it. I went to her window. The mist was down, the same white mist that had carried her voice to me 9 years and a lifetime ago, and the rushlight was gold in the small square of glass, and she was singing. I stood in the dark below the sill, and I let her finish, because I could not bring myself to cut it short. And when the last note had gone up into the fog, I stepped close, into the edge of her light, so that she could see me, and I said the thing I had been carrying down the valley for miles inside me for 9 years. "You sing to no one," I said. She spun from the basin, her hand at her throat, terror on her face, a strange man at her window in the dead of night. And then she saw it was me, the leet stranger, and the terror became confusion. And I went on before either could win, gently, quietly, because it was the truest thing I owned. "You sing to no one, Elowen, every night to the empty dark because they taught you no one wants to hear. But the dark isn't empty. It hasn't been empty for 9 years. My voice was not steady. I did not try to make it so. "I've heard you. From the ridge on the misted nights, before I ever knew your name or your face, I heard you, and I couldn't sleep for it, and I couldn't find you, and I couldn't stop looking. 9 years, I followed a voice through the fog and never reached it. And then the mist came down thick one night and carried it clear, and I came down off the ridge and followed it, hollow by hollow, mile by mile, down through the whole valley. My throat closed, and I let it and pushed on, and it led me here, to this window, to you." She was staring at me, white-faced, both hands pressed to her mouth now, and I made myself say the rest, the hard part, the part I feared. "I'm not a traveler, Elowen. I never was. My name is Rossant. I'm the king of this valley, of Fenmore, of the ridge, of these crofts, and the family that keeps you. That's the thing I hid from you, and I'm sorry for it, and I'd rather have told you at the leet in daylight than here in the dark like this. But I couldn't find a way that wouldn't frighten you, and I think there wasn't one, and I'm sorry." I drew a breath. "But I could not go on letting you sing to no one because it was never no one. It was always me." For a long, long moment she did not move. The mist breathed at the window. Somewhere out in the dark the water ran. And then her face crumpled not into fear, but into something far more terrible, a grief so old and so deep I felt it go through me like cold water. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't. Don't make it a game. I couldn't bear it from you, anyone else in the world, but not you. I've heard every cruel thing there is to hear about my singing, but I never once thought you'd be the one too." "It's no game," I said. "You're the king," she said, and it came out of her broken. "You're the king, and I'm the wolfless girl they keep for the pots, and you're standing at my window in the night telling me you've been listening for 9 years, and I'm to believe what? What am I to believe? That's not a thing that happens. That's a thing they'd say to be cruel, to make a fool of me, to have something to laugh about after." And there it was, the whole shape of what they'd made of her, laid bare. She could believe a king would come to mock her more easily than she could believe a king would come to love her. Cruelty she had a lifetime of evidence for. Tenderness she had none. So I gave her the only proof I had. The proof that could not be faked, that no cruel man could counterfeit, that I myself did not fully command. I can't argue you out of 9 years of being told you're worth nothing, I said. I don't have the words, but I have this. Listen. And I let my wolf answer her. I had not called it up on purpose in years, but it had been rising in me since the first note that night, straining toward her the way it had strained across 9 years of fog. And when I stopped holding it back, it came, not a howl, nothing to wake the Crofts, but that low sound from beneath the breastbone, the resonance, the note I'd felt struck in me the first night at her window. Except now I did not merely feel it. I let it out. I let my wolf sing back to her, low and true, the answer it had been born to give her voice, the harmony to a song it had waited its whole silent life to hear. And Eloin's whole body changed. I saw it happen. I saw the sound reach her and go into her the way her singing had gone into me. I saw it strike some string in her that no one had ever touched, some deep answering thing, and I understood in that moment what she was, what she had always been under the ash and the pity and the pots. Not wolfless, never wolfless, only silenced. Her wolf had been shut up inside her as thoroughly as her voice had, locked down by a lifetime of being told there was nothing in her worth letting out. And now, hearing mine call to it across the dark, it woke. She gasped, her hand flew to her chest. And a sound came out of her. Not a scream, not a word, but a note, low and astonished, rising up to meet mine of its own accord. Her wolf answering my wolf, her song answering my song, the two of them braiding together in the misted dark the way they had been made from the first to braid. The bond did not announce itself with a burning mark or a flare of light. It was quieter than that, and truer. It was two voices that had each been singing alone into an empty dark for years, finding in one impossible night that the dark had never been empty at all, that all along, a mile off through the fog, someone had been singing back. When the sound died away, we stood looking at each other through the small gold square of the window, both of us wet-faced, both of us shaking, and Eloin said, in a voice full of wonder and terror and the first fragile edge of something I would spend the rest of my life tending. That was, I felt, what was that? That was mine, I said, answering yours. That's what it's been all along. That's what I couldn't sleep for. Eloin, you were never wolfless. You were only ever unheard. I put my hand flat against the cold glass, and after a moment, slowly, as if she could not quite believe her own arm, she lifted hers and pressed it to the other side, palm to palm with the pane between us. And you'll never be unheard again, not while I'm living. That's not a king's command. It's a plainer thing than that. It's only I found you. After 9 years, I found you, and I'd not lose you again for the whole of my valley. There is more to tell, and I'll tell it plainly, because the tender part is told, and what came after was only the setting right of a wrong. I did not carry her off into the night. She would not have wanted it, and I would not have done it. She was free, and I meant her to know it. And a woman who has spent her life being moved about at others does not need her rescue to be one more thing done to her without her leave. So I did not lift her through that window. I told her instead that I would come in the morning in daylight as myself, with the crown on and the whole thing plain, and that she need do nothing, promise nothing, be nothing she did not wish to be. That the choice, all of it, was hers. And then I went home through the mist, and for the first time in 9 years I did not chase a voice through the fog, because the voice was safe and known and waiting for the dawn. I came in the morning as I said I would. I rode down to the low crofts with the light behind me and my people around me and the crown on my head. And the family that had kept her came out into the yard white with terror, having no notion why the king of the valley should darken their door, and less notion still when he walked past them all without a word to the thin girl standing at the back with a scrubbing cloth still in her hands. I did not rage at them. I want that set down. I had thought those first nights that I'd make them answer loudly for every year. But standing in that yard I found I had no wish to spend a single one of Eloin's mornings on them. They were small people who had done a small, grinding cruelty for years because it made them feel larger, and the truest punishment I could visit on them was the one that was already, visibly, destroying them. The sight of the wolfless charity girl they had ground beneath them being sought, in the light, before all of them, by their king. I stopped before her. The yard went silent. She looked up at me, the cloth still in her hands, her eyes enormous, and I saw her brace. The old flinch, the lifetime's habit, the certainty even now that being noticed was the beginning of trouble. "Eloin," I said, so that the whole yard heard it. I've come to ask you something, and you're free to answer it however you will, and no ill will come to you whatever you say. You have my word before all these witnesses." I heard the family flinch at that. I did not look at them. "You've spent your life singing to no one because you were told no one wished to hear. I've come to tell you before the people who told you so that they were wrong. That your voice is the finest thing in this valley, and your worth is greater than the whole of my hall, and I've spent 9 years of my life proving it to myself by being unable to sleep for the want of you." I went down then, before all of them, onto one knee in the mud of that mean little yard, and I took the scrubbing cloth gently from her hands and set it aside, and I held her thin, cold fingers in both of mine. "I'd have you sing beside me, not below anyone, for the rest of both our lives, as my mate, as my Luna, as my queen, but only if you wish it. The choice is yours, Aloin. It's the first thing in your life that's been wholly only yours. Whatever you choose, you leave this yard free." For a long moment she could not speak. She looked down at me, the king in the mud at her feet, and then out at the family frozen white in the yard, and then up at the gray sky over the water meadows where her voice had gone every night for years into the empty dark. And then she did the thing that told me, more than any word could have, that the woman under the ash had survived everything they'd done to her whole and unbroken and entirely herself. She did not answer me in speech. She sang, right there in the yard in the daylight before the family that had punished her for it her whole life. She lifted her head, and she opened her throat, and she let her voice go up into the morning, clear and unafraid, for the first time in her life sung to someone. Sung at someone, sung as an answer, and my wolf rose up in me and sang back, there in the mud with her hands in mine, and the two sounds braided up into the gray sky over Fenmore for the whole valley to hear. She chose me with the one thing they had spent her whole life teaching her to hide. I have never in all the years since heard anything to equal it. She is my Luna now, and has been these many years, and I will tell you the truth of what our life became, because the winning of it was only the start. She did not become overnight a woman without the flinch. That is not how it goes, whatever the stories say. For a long while she would still brace out of habit when a door opened suddenly or a voice was raised. For a long while she would still, without thinking, reach to make herself small in a room. It took years for the Crofts to leave her. I did not hurry it. I only made certain, morning on morning, that she woke in a place where her voice was wanted, where being noticed was the beginning of no trouble at all, where the thing she'd been taught to lock in the dark was the very thing her whole household now leaned toward, the way I had leaned toward it across 9 years of fog. She sings in the high hall now, on the misted nights. Not for command and not for show, she would still die before she'd sing on command, but because the hour is hers, as it always was, and now the hour is not spent alone. The whole hold has learned to go quiet when she begins. Hard old warriors set down their cups. And I sit beside her, the king who could not sleep for 9 years, and I listen to the sound I chased through the fog for a decade, sung now not to the empty dark, but to a hall full of people who would every one of them kneel for her. And my wolf, which was silent in me for so long I mourned it as dead, sings back to her every time, low and true, the answer it was born to give. The family that kept her I did not ruin. I did a thing I think was harder for them. I let them live in the valley, small as they'd always been, and watch, year on year, the wolfless charity girl they'd ground beneath them rule the hold with a gentleness they could never have understood, loved by a people who'd have died for her, seated at the king's right hand. She has never once been cruel to them. That is the measure of her, and it shames them more than any cruelty of mine could have. I think sometimes of the man I was before her, the closed king, the shut door, the silence I'd buried and called my nature. I think of the 9 years I spent standing at cold windows chasing a voice through the fog, certain I was haunted, certain the thing I strained toward was some grief dressed up as a song. And then I look at her beside me in the firelight, ash long gone from her cheek, her head thrown back, singing to a hall that loves her, singing at last to someone, and I understand that I was never haunted at all. I was only being called home, across the dark, by the one voice in all the world that mine was made to answer. And it took me 9 years to follow it, and I would follow it 900 more. She sings to no one no longer. She sings to me,